gentlemen, thanks again for tuning in to Psychedelics today. Today on the show we have Shane LeMaster. Shane was on the show about a year ago, and I think he had a previous appearance as well, so this will be the third time he's been on the show. He is a therapist and all-around interesting guy living in Colorado. We got the chance to meet at a DMTX event in Boulder a while back, and it was nice. On the show today, we chat about personal journeying with psychedelics, including ketamine and others. Also talk a bunch about breath work, and we get into a bunch of stuff around jiu-jitsu and body and self-development, and the psychological impacts of that, similarities and differences between psychedelics, and much more. I think it was really a fun conversation. We got to dig into some really exciting stuff around why does the mainstream not yet accept this work generally. Talking about Freud, like why is Freud not accepted? Why is Jung not accepted? Same with Groff, stuff like that. So it was fun to explore that with Shane, and hope you enjoy that as well. So enjoy the show. Before we get the show going, I want to let you know about a special class we're doing. Kyle and I have been teaching quite a bit of drug harm reduction information and how to get a benefit from psychedelic use if that's where you're going to go. And we packaged this Navigating Psychedelics course together and put that for sale. It's been going for well over a year now, I think. And it's been going great. People love it. Zero complaints. We actually just did a whole bunch of improvements on it, fixed a lot of the... There were some audio issues that one or two people complained about, and I think we fixed that. So it's really ready to go. One of the main reasons we put it together was that we saw there was a whole bunch of folks out there doing drugs, including psychedelics, without much education. And we've also now seen a spike of various deaths from drug use. Often it's because people are using the wrong drugs or mixing incorrectly. When it's like a known dangerous combination, you might want to not do that. Fentanyl is showing up in all sorts of weird places. Fentanyl being a really powerful opiate that can kill most folks with a really small amount of the drug. So it's scary out there. And I think we even just lost a pretty popular rapper, Mac Miller. So like even famous people aren't immune from this. Like it's not like various parts of the drug supply chain are necessarily more pure than others. If you don't know the person making it, you're going to want to verify what you're eating. If you can afford to consume, you can afford to test. Is that how it goes? There's some more. If you can afford to ingest, you can afford to test. There it is. Yeah. So, there's a lot of stuff going on, and education is key to that. I think the last time I went to the emergency room, it was about $100 after insurance. So if I didn't have insurance, it probably would have been $500 to $800. And imagine if you were actually in a critical situation that required an ambulance and all that other stuff. Extraordinarily expensive. Why not get ahead of it and invest some time and money into getting educated? Navigating Psychedelics could really help you out. This class that Kyle and I put together with Psychedelics today, we've got a whole bunch of expert instructors teaching our master classes on different sub aspects of the field. So, anything from integration practices to how to pick an appropriate ayahuasca facility in the Amazon, which is not an easy task. So be careful there. And a special thing we're doing with this class in the month of October is a live supported version. So on a number of dates throughout October, we are going to be doing hour to 2 hour webinars. I think it's actually an hour and a half, covering what the class went through in the online lessons. So we can debrief, you can ask questions and get with the others in the class in some sort of offline capacity, and build community, get educated. What's better than that? So the dates of this class are October 4, October 11, 18, and 25. So all through October, and it is from 7:30 to 9 Eastern time, 4:30 to 6 Pacific. So hopefully you people in the Pacific can make that work. If not, stay tuned, and we'll hopefully get one in your time zone in the future. So you can find this class for sale at psychedelicstodayshop.com, psychedelicstoday.com, and just click the shop button and bring you there. And it's on the featured products list. So hopefully some of you are interested in being a little more cautious with your life and with your friends, and are interested in, getting learned, getting a little deeper with this knowledge. Like, the podcast is great, but structured learning is something that's really hard to compete with. So again, psychedelicstodayshop.com for that. I'll make this next part quick. So if you want to support us, just leave us a review on iTunes. Or on Facebook. We would love it. It really helps us out, makes a difference. And I personally am running 3 workshops in Breckenridge, Colorado. I have November 17 and 18, and also December 15. They're full day transpersonal breathwork workshops. So we are doing Stan Groff style work, and it's with some very loud, impressive Bose PA speakers. And I am very excited about it. We've already sold a few tickets, and expect to hear more about it. Hope to see some of you there. If you have any questions or comments or feedback, psychedelicstoday email@gmail.com. Enjoy the show with Shane LeMaster, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Today on the show, we have Shane LeMaster again. I think this is your 3rd time on the show?
3rd time.
That's a record. Other than Kyle and I, that's a record. That's great.
Setting new records. All right.
So in the past, we chatted about all sorts of fun stuff, from fascinating ketamine journeys to either microdosing or slightly more than macrodosing to help with sports performance, and all sorts of other stuff, from like trauma dynamics to somatic stuff. And yeah, it's been...
Flow states and yeah.
Absolutely. It's been really fun. I think the one thing that sticks in my mind from the past is the Legoland that happened on some ketamine experiences. Still have yet to do exploratory ketamine outside of a hospital setting, but I'll keep you posted on that.
Okay.
So
maybe write it down afterwards.
Yeah, right. Immediately. I'll send you the videotape. So the first thing that stuck out when we started chatting earlier was you wanted to kind of talk about using psychedelics or ketamine for personal journey and journey work stuff. Do you it sounds like this is a recurring theme that's been really helpful for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I rediscovered psychedelics with a new intention behind it, instead of recreational, but now for intentional use, it started out spiritual. It's gotten intellectual. It's gotten creative at times. I've dipped into, picking apart human performance in my mind and how we can enhance it through these states. And I've gone back around to spiritual. So yeah, I'd say since I rediscovered it in this light, I have made it an integral part to my own personal development and my own personal growth. I don't necessarily advocate that for everybody, but for me personally, not only psychedelics, but the specific combination of psychedelic use, daily meditation, mindfulness practices, mastery experiences, all these things that I have integrated into my daily life. Psychedelics is definitely part of that and helping me explore who I am and my internal world and how I relate to the external world. Long answer, psychedelics are instrumental for me.
Yeah. So, for me, it's been breath work, over my lifetime. It's been the thing that I've come back to over and over again. Serious psychedelic work has definitely helped me. It just hasn't been the habit the way I do it. Probably should be, but there's a certain level of familiarity I have with breathwork that just makes me go that way typically. But yeah, I guess, do you have any particular stories you might be able to share about it, or tips for folks that might be feeling called to try it out?
Well, I mean, I think we've talked about it in the past, some of breaking down people's initial fears or some of the stigmas or propaganda surrounding it. That all that stuff is important, especially for newcomers to these medicines and substances and molecules. But um, I think I could bring a little bit more depth to what your listeners are hearing right now by maybe sharing some personal stuff that I'm working on through some of my journey work currently. So a lot of my biggest insights come during these big journey work sessions, and it doesn't, different substances will I will have different intentions with them, but um, recently I have been working on softening my hard edges. So as a person, as a man in this society, I've been raised to be hard and to be tough and um, push my emotions down and don't cry and don't show any connection or whatever. And it really inhibits my ability to connect with people. And as a therapist, being able to connect with people is sort of my profession. So there's a big part of it. And in order to enhance not only my profession, but also now I'm married, so enhancing my relationship with my wife, I need to we all have this feminine side, and I need to start allowing that a little bit more. And so to me, in my head, that means a softening of my edges. I'm big into warrior culture, especially the samurai, and they talk a lot about sharpening your edge, your mental edge, you know, all these things in reference to blades and things like that. And I think it's a good metaphor for me for softening my edge. And in order to do that, I've really been working with this construct that I believe everybody has inside of them, which is the scared child inside of all of us. Are you familiar? I mean, right away, like your response tells me you felt something in your own experience based off that phrase.
Right.
Scared.
So I think it used to be like a really popular phrasing in therapy world, right? Like the inner child. Like we talk
Mhm.
about it in breath work here and there. Um,
Yeah, it certainly is an archetype in the psychological circles.
yeah, it's interesting, right? It's like this metaphor that seems to really work well. Um,
Yeah.
hmm.
Yeah, so for me anyway, this was shown to me in one of my recent journeys. I really just wanted to explore the root cause of a lot of my issues in relationships and my inability to connect with this sensitive, softer side of myself. And going in with those specific questions, I was immediately shown or almost like relived the experience of being. I remember being, must have been 2 or 3 years old, at my aunt's wedding in a hotel, big hotel, and the babysitter fell asleep, and I locked myself out in the hallway.
Mm.
And at that age, the hallway seemed infinite, and there was nobody there. Was banging on the door, couldn't get back in the door, couldn't get any help from anybody, and just felt like curled up in this ball, wanting to escape all reality in that moment. And it dawned on me that we all have been frightened as children or abused or neglected. Like we all have our own story behind that, and all those events leave imprints on us
Mm.
and affect our behavior now as adults. So the more I thought about it, the more I realized that a lot of my hyper masculine behavior, or maybe the motivations behind some of the things that I do and the way that I do them and the intensity that I give to life, might have something to do with trying to cover up that scared child and not let crying scared Shane out, and really opened my eyes. And so these days I'm trying to integrate that and live more into that. And I find that if I can bring the image of scared little Shane up in my mind when I'm feeling fear, then my level of compassion that I can have, self compassion for myself, my ability to forgive myself, my ability to make wiser decisions, it comes so much easier. Um,
Mm.
Things just flow so much easier. And so that's something I'm working with, something that might be a suggestion for people to explore.
Mm. Yeah, that's really good. I think there's, I think that's really core to the way I operate in breathwork too. Like there's this whole history you have, and if you're kind of ignoring it or forget about it, it can kind of be unconsciously shaping the way you're executing your life. And yeah, the way you laid that out, I can see a lot of that in myself too. I've been locked in a few scenarios that I can recall being totally helpless. Like I think a garage in the middle of summer, I just couldn't figure out how to get out of there. God knows how old I was. I'm hoping I was 8, but I probably was a lot older. So yeah, it's fascinating. And that's like, the children kind of want that reassurance of like having help available like almost all the time if they need it. And that's, I think, a formative influence on our later psychology. I think all later psychology.
Yeah, I think we all have that inborn desire to be loved and nurtured and cared for. And as kids, sometimes if we find ourselves in situations where we're not getting that level of attachment that we need, we develop bad habits around that as adults. I had attachment issues for the longest time. And thank God I had these journeys that pointed this out to me, because I did a lot of work on this right before I got married. And I got married last week. And for the last year since we've last talked, I've been really working on, being okay with letting go of my concept of self and my concept of being independent, and now integrating this entirely other being into, this union of two people joining into one soul space, and it was completely unfamiliar territory for me. And a lot of this work, breath work in my meditation too, helps me get through a lot of those anxieties and those emotions that come up for me when I'm working on this stuff.
Absolutely. Do you notice in your journey work a huge difference between like a ketamine experience and something like a peyote experience?
A difference in what?
I would say in terms of like messaging, like you walk out, like you get a very different message in terms of like which way to go in your life.
Well, all of them pretty much. I end the journey feeling as if I'm being guided in the right direction. None of them, it never feels like any of them are leading me astray or leading me down a dark path. That's for sure. But I guess the way that they communicate it and the way that it manifests in my life afterwards, the way it integrates, I would say that that's been different for me. Whereas the peyote seems to unpack itself over months and months and months, 6 months and a year, and I still see shifts and changes going on around me and inside of me that I know the medicine's still working. Whereas the ketamine, I feel shifts for a week, 2 weeks. I don't feel it as much, and it's more about me making conscious effort to integrate these new insights rather than feeling the medicine doing the work on me without my effort.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. And then with the breath work I've had experience with too, it's, the afterglow seems to fade even more so than or more quickly than the ketamine too. I'll feel great that night. Definitely uplifted the next day, maybe 2 days. But then if I want to keep that feeling, I got to do the breath work again. And, the good thing about breath work is there is no tolerance that you build up to it. So yeah, what's your experience around that?
I'll occasionally get the sense that it's coming from a different source with drugs. With breath work, things will present as other, like as if they're spirits here and there, but I don't necessarily have the same feeling that they are than if I was on a substance. It's it's fascinating. And the different drugs are obviously really different. Like there's this concept I'm trying to get through lately. I'm trying to work it out before I share it too much, but drug chauvinism, where it's like my drug is always better than your drug.
Mm.
And some people might think that's objectively true when it's like highly context dependent, and there's a lot of stuff going on there to come up with that kind of thing. Like, is LSD worse than mushrooms for spiritual development? And I don't know that we can say definitively yes or no on something like that, or breath work even. But there was a point when Stan Groff said something along the lines of, "Why would you do breath work if you have LSD?" I'm like, you're not wrong. I guess it's a matter of timing. Like, do you have the time and support required to have a good effect? And I think there's something about the group work process in breathwork sessions that are really valuable for me. Just that deeper sense of connection that plays out over the course of a weekend, I think, is hugely valuable and psychedelic in some of its own ways. Yeah, it's an interesting concept, though. Like, what is the difference between these different compounds and their journeys and their messages? And I feel like what I got from ayahuasca is very similar to what I get in breathwork all the time. It's just, keep being nice and building relationships, don't be a dick. And
sure.
Like, is that really rocket science? No. I should be able to figure that out on my own, but I don't, because I'm a human. And yeah, it's interesting. I think people should, spend some time thinking about that and reflecting on their own experiences to see like what they think and what their experience tells them on that. Because who knows what the real answer is.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, you mentioned breathwork and ayahuasca, and those are both, and even peyote too, are traditionally taken in groups, or done in groups. It's commonplace. Even back thousands of years in tribal, or in tribes that would still practice breathwork during dances and things like that too. It was done in community, and so that sense of community is super powerful. And then there's other substances that, it shows that you get better results when done alone, and it's a completely internal journey. And this idea of psychedelic chauvinism, I love that term you put to it too, because, it seems like a moot debate to me, because one psychedelic that's going to be my favorite that I think is good for something is going to be completely different for you, and it's completely subjective experience. I find certain psychedelics and breathwork and meditation useful for very specific things, whereas, I think of them as tools. This tool, I feel, works best for this project, whereas you may feel, no, I have a tool that I like using for it, and we both get the same job done. It's just two different tools that do the same job, and our choice in which one we choose to do.
So I really like this idea of, you need multiple tools. One line I used to use a lot was, you can't clean your whole house with a vacuum. You need a few other things. You can't build a house with just a hammer. Well, maybe you could, but you need a few other things. It's like if LSD is the hammer and ketamine is a saw, you can't say a hammer is better than a saw. It's like they're essential in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Both.
Yeah. Are you involved with any of the ketamine work happening in Fort Collins? I think Scott Shannon was doing a bunch of stuff up there, but now he's doing MAPS work. Like, were you in that mix at all?
Mm-hmm. Not so much in that mix, but Dr. Scott Shannon and I are friends, and I have gone to his clinic and done ketamine therapy through him. But I've also worked with the Wholeness Center in different contexts as well. And I believe he's been running the MAPS studies and his ketamine clinic simultaneously. So that's fantastic.
He's a real trooper. Wow. I need to follow up with him again soon. We had a great time chatting with him. It's interesting that there's so much happening in Fort Collins.
Yeah, I know. We're becoming a new epicenter, which I love. I'm hoping to pursue a PhD at Colorado State, and it'd be great if, Fort Collins and the university here locally got on board with maybe some psychedelic research, that'd be awesome.
Yes. That'd be very convenient for a PhD. Do you have an inclination on what you're looking to do as part of a PhD?
Well, I have a ton of ideas, too many to probably ever get to, but I'm hoping to pursue a PhD in the social work department. I've been a clinical, counselor, psychotherapist, addictions counselor for, a while now, almost a decade. And I find myself, I'm really good at my job. I connect with people and I constantly get good feedback from people that they're changing and making progress. But, those are small ripples and they feel good. It feels good to impact people on an individual level. I just feel I'm getting this draw now, this feeling that I need to take my dreams a little bit bigger and see how I can impact people on a community level, on a societal level, on a global level, and help spread ideas of heightened states of consciousness, altered states of consciousness, and help people empower themselves to be better humans. And I feel like social work is a good direction to pursue in that sense. The doors that it could possibly open for policy reform in education programs or for resiliency training for soldiers prior to deployments so that we have less instances of PTSD or, Fortune 500 companies looking to just improve the well-being and happiness of their employees. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to pursue. I have interest in mindfulness and strength-based and positive psychology interventions, really boosting people's strengths up while working on weaknesses rather than focusing on what's wrong with people and clinical diagnoses. I'm more in line with like Abraham Maslow and Seligman and Peterson and character strengths and virtues and that type of conversations with clients. I find it that they when they empower themselves, they find that they have a lot more solution and they can heal their own issues. They have the power to do that.
Okay, so we've actually not talked too much about stuff like Jordan Peterson, Seligman, and stuff like that around virtues and strengths, but I think it is essential. Like obviously there's folks who have had bad shit happen to them and will probably not get out of the hole, but like do you have a sense as to why people dislike that model? Like I think it's very logical and seems powerful. It's helped me a lot, but I don't know, like do you see like what they're complaining about?
There's a couple factors that I see. When I go to these conferences for different psychological associations or groups that I'm a part of, I see a lot of people kind of locked into this old school thinking, sort of like almost like because of their education or the way that they were conditioned through the education system, they're sort of locked into this very particular way of thinking about psychology and the mind, based on old theoretical models and things like that. Even in my undergrad at CU Boulder in the early 2000s, a lot of Freud was still being taught. And today, I agree, Freud has some good stuff, but it shouldn't be the focus in a Psych 101 course.
Right.
We should be covering Carl Jung and covering all these other people who have been just as influential, if not more so, as we're seeing these days. So I see people being stuck in their old frameworks, maybe out of fear for being ridiculed or for exploring outside of what they feel they know. I also, when I talk to others in my field from a Jungian perspective, they almost kind of scoff at it. A lot of them, almost as if it has mystical connotations, or like it can't be can't be real psychological science because it's all woo woo stuff and hippy dippy and you know it's I chalk that up to ignorance. I chalk that up to lack of experience personally with some of these concepts. You and I both have had very real experiences about character strengths and virtues that have affected us very deeply. And maybe some of these other people just haven't experienced that themselves. I couldn't really tell you if there's one reason why they're doing that, but those are just a couple of the observations I've made from some of these conferences that I go to.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's almost like the data hasn't matured enough for whatever reason to convince folks of the, I don't know, some sort of
the efficacy.
Yeah, exactly. Like Jungian stuff is fascinating, but the data is kind of sparse. But I think, more people need to have these numinous experiences that are really hard to put words to before maybe Jung and Groff are more mainstreamed. Like, maybe the thing that's going to really shift the discussion is these DMT vape pens that are going around. I'm sure you've seen these. It's like a little screw-on cartridge to a battery, and you just pull. Like, you don't need all the fancy stuff to have a DMT experience anymore. You just put the thing in your mouth and pull. You've not seen that?
No, I haven't.
So I think some news sources started writing about them, but they've been around for probably 5 years now.
I've seen the big bulky vaporizers for DMT, but not like the single hit plug and play version that you're describing.
Yeah, it looks just like a pen that would have like a concentrate fluid, like
right,
like held in a, I don't even know what this stuff is. It's like propylene glycol or something. There's like some sort of fluid that the THC is usually held in for weed. It's like the same device you would see somebody use at a concert or something or at home. Yeah, it's fascinating, man. I think that's really going to democratize the experience because you no longer need to, like, it knocks down a lot of barriers. Like for LSD, it's DMT is going to take less than an hour. You no longer need to prep a freebase setup, buy a rig. Someone just hands you this thing and it's good to go. And you can have one of the most profound psychedelic visionary experiences of your life, by accident in a parking lot somewhere, So what happens when these things get out at the APA or like the Humanistic Psychology Association meetings, something like that? It'd be fascinating. Like if the humanists started smoking DMT and all of a sudden we're like, oh, we're going to start studying Groff and Jung now. I guess we've hit a limit. It's speculation, but technology becoming more available and cheaper and just distributing, like the amount of money DMT creators could make off of it this way as opposed to, just selling powders, I think is pretty extreme. So I think it's just a market inevitability too.
Well, that would make sense. Make it more convenient for the consumer. But you talk about, sort of, why hasn't this movement sort of taken off? And it has been around for a significant amount of time. There's good research in this area of strengths and virtues and developing that in order to be a better human. But just like, the term mindfulness or meditation, it's been around forever. It just took some time to catch on in our culture. I feel like the more we talk about these topics, and I think one of the biggest catalysts for this change is going to be podcasts like this podcast and like my podcast, which I just started recently. It's called Conversations with the Mind. For any of your listeners who want to go out and find that. But we're having these conversations and these conversations are getting out, and hopefully it's causing ripple effects in your listeners to have these conversations with others and creating bigger and bigger ripples. I think all of these things, that and the podcast and the DMT pens, are all working towards this monumental shift in consciousness towards an evolution, positive evolution in the right direction, where the entire world, just like technology, I think they said it doesn't even double every year. It like, I don't know, like 10 times this year's technology is going to come out next year. That's what's going to happen to our consciousness. It's going to reach this monumental upswing, and then within a few years, the world's just totally going to be changed. Wars may stop. We're going to find solutions for some of our biggest problems. People will be working together. We're going to have more compassion for each other. And I see all this stuff sort of bubbling right now, the DMT pens and the podcasts and people on the street. I walk by and having conversations like we're having now and talking about, where's our place in the cosmos, things like that. And it's exciting to see. For me, it's really exciting to see and to be a part of it too.
I heard this line the other day. Who said it? I think it was Musk on the Rogan podcast recently about like how much smarter are you now with your cell phone than you were 20 years ago. Your memory's better. You could do better math. Like the extent to which we are improved by our cell phones, if done well, is incredible. And yeah, I think that along with all the other chemical and technological developments, it's going to really change our experience of being alive quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like just thinking about what does virtual reality look like 4 years from now? Horrifying prospect. Also amazing prospect. Like, it's a really fascinating time to be alive. And, as terrifying as it is with, ecological catastrophe looming and, this kind of creepy group in charge of the U.S. government for a little while longer. Like all these things just seem dark, but it doesn't seem insurmountable with the rate at which our abilities are improving.
Absolutely. And we can even think of like these substances as technologies too.
Absolutely.
We talk about them as medicines, and I talk about them as tools, but we can think of them as internal technologies too. Just like the cell phone is enhancing our memory and our eye-hand coordination and all these other things, these psychedelics can be technologies that we can use to enhance all sorts of things, connectedness, compassion, growth mindset, flow states, all these different possibilities out there to evolve as human beings and as spiritual beings.
Groff uses this line, spiritual technology or technologies of the sacred. And I think that helps a lot because it's like, okay, you're no longer talking about like many different types of technology. It's all these things are methods. And technology could be a method, like breath work or whatever. So it's a really, it's a good point.
Well, even breath work. I mean, with that, you're altering the technology that is your human body. You're enhancing the way that it works, and you're causing it to function in a very specific way that you desire in the moment, just like any other technology would. It's enhancing your experience to get a certain outcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, for whatever reason, Tim Leary comes up for me right now, and one of his clever phrasings was hedonic engineering. So like, how do we become engineering specialists around like how to live a more pleasurable life or a maximally pleasurable life? So it's not necessarily about just like tickling the right hormone glands or whatever, but it's like, how do we, who was it? Epicurus, I think. So like the Epicurean concept of like, there's just the right ratios of things in your life that could give you the most pleasurable life. It's like not too much wine, but the right amount and the right amount of food and the right amount of recreation or exercise or whatever. Like there's these like, fine-tuned things we could do, and becoming conscious of those patterns and improving our quality of life as a result. I think that time's coming, man. Like positive psychology meets wearable wearable technology that can track your heart rate and stress levels, stuff like that. Like, I think in a handful of years, we could be a lot happier if we play our cards right, at least in the Western world.
Yeah, I hope so.
Obviously, the folks that are just stuck on TV and not doing anything are going to not feel great.
Right. Well, it's up to people like you and me who are doing podcasts, and up to people like those who are listening to both of our podcasts to go out there and, at least we need to negate, the negative influences that are driving society right now. But we need, no one else is going to do it for us. We have to go out there. We have to make this change. We have to be part of it if we want to see the results. And that's what I'm finding anyway, that, I think I only started my podcast like 3 months ago. And since then, I've just started noticing more of the concepts that we talk about on the podcast. I start noticing these qualities shift in people. So the more that we put these messages out there, the more positive feedback we're going to receive that what we're doing is the right path.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really surprised that these people like you're talking about who run the government and make bad decisions on our behalf, how the backlash and the negative feedback that they put out is not coming back to hit them and bite them in the ass yet. I wish that would happen. I wish karma would speed up a little bit to do that, but it's not my place to be their karma,
Yeah, absolutely. So like, one thing that's really helped me in my life personally is podcasting and creating stuff that's helpful to other folks. I think Musk said that was a big driving force for him and his creations. There's this quote I found on Tim Ferriss's Twitter feed a while ago. Creation is a better means of self-expression than possession. It is through creating, not possessing, that life is revealed. So it's like, if you're just consuming, like, I want to eat 400 cannolis this week, and like, that's how you're expressing you, like, that's not going to be great. Same thing with like Rolexes. That doesn't really feel the best, but perhaps creating something that really expresses what's happening internally for you, or creating things that are really helpful for other people, perhaps that's really like a thing folks should focus on. Like, we want this Kundalini awakening. We want spirit to take over so we don't have to struggle anymore. But perhaps that's not the thing. Perhaps it's creating and deeper engagement with your life and your relationship to the world.
Yeah, and perhaps the struggles that you're going through right now in the moment, although you're asking for them to be released, perhaps they are the catalyst for creation that you're going to make that is going to impact just far more than just yourself, I love that you brought this idea up of creation. That's another thing that I've been working on a lot that came up to me in a recent ketamine journey. I had all these questions of what do I do next? What am I doing? How do I make these things better? And the message I kept getting was, be a creative force in the universe. And that just really struck me. So I went in my bathroom and I wrote it with a dry erase marker on my mirror, which is a common practice for me to just keep it on my on the forefront of my mind. But I've started applying that phrase to numerous areas of my life, being a creative force rather than a destructive force, being a creative force rather than a force that just consumes, creating and giving back more, producing content that others will benefit from, not for my own well-being, and taking it to jiu-jitsu and on the mats for sure. Just keeping this mantra going on in my mind as I'm rolling, be a creative force, be a creative force. And it's helping me create new moves, create new positions, create new neural pathways for defenses and setups and all sorts of things. And like you said, it feels so good to create and bring something to fruition and to share it, most importantly, not to possess it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. It's something about being interactive with a community too. It's like, but people could create and just put it in the closet and still get some extreme benefit from that, even if they're not sharing. But I think sharing amplifies a bit, especially if you're getting positive feedback of some kind.
Yeah, I would say so too.
So let's dig in a little bit more to your podcast. Like, what's the focus of Conversations with the Mind? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Conversations with the Mind. Your listeners can find it on anywhere that podcasts are available. So the idea behind the podcast, and really the title of the podcast, is this idea of one mind having a conversation with another mind. So me and my podcast guest, two minds interacting, sharing knowledge, sharing experience, sharing distress, sharing solution, and adding this sharing and the sum of our two parts coming together, adding this out into the greater knowledge base of the collective mind, sort of like the Akashic records, just bringing multiple experiences together to reflect on each other's experiences, to connect, and to put that out to others and hope that it connects with other people and starts ripple effects out with our listeners so that they can begin engaging in conversations around consciousness, around their experience, around these topics like trauma and growth mindset and all these things that we talk about. And really, that's sort of my contribution to what we were talking about before, this wave of all these different things coming together to create this massive consciousness shift in the world. This is how I'm trying to help that process along, by sharing multiple experiences and letting people know that, hey, you're not alone in what you're going through. Here's this guest that I have today, and he's been through addiction and all these things, and hoping that others can connect and not feel so alone. So that's what it's really about, just the sharing of the knowledge, and one mind having a conversation with another mind about what the mind is.
Yeah, nature of mind is very fascinating. I love that you're doing it, man. It sounds awesome, and I I wish more people would start more podcasts. So I'm really happy you did it. I wonder, like, at a certain point, like when, oh no, let's back up. Joe Rogan 3-4 years ago, I recall him saying there's an audience for everybody. Like, everybody could be a creator and still get a whole bunch of listeners. So I'm just like, if anybody out there is saying, oh, I don't want to do it, nobody's going to listen to me, I just say do it. It's really, really awesome. How else are you going to get access to all these people that you want to talk to? That's exactly. One of the best parts is I've just been able to get tons of free books and tons of access to folks who I would have never had the opportunity to talk to otherwise.
Yeah, if you're seeking community in your life, and that's what you want community in your life, go out and create that community. We're essentially doing that by sharing our ideas, and then people will connect with us, and then we build this community. You and I talked on this format far before we ever met in person, but right away, when we met down in Boulder, we gave each other big hugs. It's like, wow, you're a part of my community just by having a 1-hour conversation with you and connecting with you and letting our egos go a little bit just to see where we get. It was really cool.
Yeah, it was. It's really fun, man. And yeah, you don't even need to meet these people. Often you won't meet the person for 5-6 years and you still have a great connection from how well, hopefully, you connected on your interview. Yeah, and it's it's not free to have a podcast. We have a lot of expenses here, but you could do it for really cheap. Like, I think free to $10 a month is a pretty good range.
Right now I'm doing mine for free.
Yeah, so people take that to heart. It doesn't have to cost money.
Yeah, just recording on my cell phone.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's great. Are you planning to interview any people you do jiu-jitsu with that might have psychedelic experiences or things to say about them?
Actually, I did a podcast over the weekend with one of my training partners, and that was pretty much all of what we talked about was journeys through addictions, psychedelic assisted treatments, how it's enhanced our martial arts and our life afterwards. Um, yeah, I've talked to veterans who have used psychedelics to help them. I've talked to my own coach about, more about, strength of character and good work ethic and always wanting to learn. And, we talked to PhD credentialed people, and we talk to just my friends off the street, and everybody has something to contribute to this podcast. I do hope to eventually build up to interviewing um, more prominent figures that I've met at other conferences that have done, like the Joe Rogan podcast and stuff like that. But I'm just building. We just did episode 9 today. So I assume once we get up there in our numbers, people will start reaching out to us, and we'll be able to book higher profile people.
Yeah, that's great, man. I think one of the more interesting things Kyle and I have done here is consciously tried to stay away from a lot of the big names and find new folks that may have not had as much of a platform. Like
That's great.
100, I think you'll be episode 105. We haven't had Rick Doblin on, Amanda Fielding. We just barely had Dennis McKenna on. That was a good interview, but
it's a great interview.
Thanks.
I hope to have him on as well.
Yeah, like there's something to be said for just going for the smaller folks too, because there's a lot of voices out there, a lot of diversity. But it is also amazing to get those folks. Like our biggest disappointment probably is we haven't coordinated to get Stan Groff on the show.
Yeah.
But hopefully we can pull that off in the near future.
Yeah, that would be epic.
Yeah, I think Kyle and I are both like shaking a little bit, going, "Oh," but I hung out with the guy. He's super nice. Had a great time in California a year or two ago. Had a bunch of meals with him. He gave me some interesting advice about if you wanted to do psychedelic work or breath work with somebody who is recovering from alcoholism, there's like a certain window of time you needed before their last drink and the therapy for the therapy to stick. I think it was something along the lines of 30 to 60 days.
Okay. That's interesting.
Right. So if someone's struggling with addiction and maybe you start at 3 weeks, but you keep going for a month, like maybe that's good. Maybe that's adequate.
Yeah.
But who knows? It's really hard to say.
Yeah.
Because we don't have the data, right? That's more of like a Jungian, Freudian statement than like a thing backed up by double-blind clinical research,
Sure.
which is really interesting. I don't know. Like another interesting thing was Carhart Harris. Did you know that he was a Freudian or is a Freudian?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, check that out sometime. He's got his background in Freudian analysis, and I think a lot of his work is around proving Freudian theory, ideology, loosely, with neuroimaging. And he thinks so far he's doing well, which is fascinating.
Yeah. Well, like I said before, Freud is a very important figure in the body of history around psychology, and a lot of his stuff is valid. But just like any other scientific theory, we should constantly be trying to disprove these theories to gain a greater understanding of what's really going on. So a lot of his stuff is valid, but people need to also account for that a lot of his stuff is being disproven. A lot of his stuff is being shown as less valid than maybe some other theories by other people, including Jung and Seligman and Peterson. But yeah, we should see that shift in every field of science. I can't tell you how much joy and excitement I get when I read an article from, a new quantum physics journal or something disproving one of Einstein's ideas. Not because, I'm a huge fan of Einstein, but it's exciting because it sort of breaks the current paradigm, and it I can feel the growth in the knowledge base of the human species. You know, unfortunately, the general public doesn't get hip to a lot of these new research ideas and things like that, and even ideas like simulation theory and string theory and stuff like that, and quantum mechanics is still foreign to a lot of people who still ascribe to Newtonian physics and Einstein's theories and stuff like that. So that'll come along with this giant consciousness shift, is people will start to open their eyes and maybe let down some of their defense mechanisms that are not allowing this new information to come in. That's my hope anyway. And psychedelics are a great way to help break some of those conditioned thought patterns.
So I don't know where I got this analogy, or yeah, I guess analogy is the right word, but default mode network stuff, like our default brain behavior being kind of like a sledding hill that gets a rut from you keep sledding on the same hill. It's just the easiest way for the sled to go down, or neuronal impulses, I guess, to go through. Like we develop these routes that just become our default. And psychedelics kind of filling that in temporarily, so you can exercise some new routes, brain mapping or whatever. That just came to mind for whatever reason based on what you've said. Have you thought about that analogy or?
No, but that's a great analogy. It might be like, I think it's one that people can connect well with. After we, from whatever experiences we have growing up, all the way until the day we die, they create these neural pathways, and they become hardwired with repetition and habit, just like that sled going down that one line in the hill. But like you said, psychedelics, I think, to enhance its metaphor even more, would be like standing on top of that sledding hill. And for the first time, you're not just looking down at this one path, but you finally look up and you do a 360-degree turn, and you see that you're on top of this peak, and you can take your sled in any direction that you want. It's like you're shown so many more options for thoughts that you could have about anything. So when you're reprocessing trauma, oftentimes people will think about their trauma and tell themselves one story over and over and over and over again. And it's not until we can bring the trauma back up and then show them that they have other options to think about this trauma, other pathways they could take their thoughts that could serve them better. That's where the change comes from. So with this metaphor, it's sort of like, standing at the top of the peak and realizing, oh, hey, I don't have to go down this one path. I'm going to take the back way down and go off that sweet jump, and then hit the half pipe on the way down and have a blast doing it,
Yes, absolutely. Thinking about your jiu-jitsu career, I'm calling it a career because I don't know what people call it.
What's a career now? I never thought it would be, but it is now.
It's fascinating because it's similar to other sports in that you have these certain like shapes you put your body in relation to other things, typically in jiu-jitsu, other people. But like you would get set in certain habits, and like a microdose or medium dose might help shake up your habituated patterns, and you might discover new things. I think you were hinting at it earlier, like new holds or new stuff that you haven't ever done before just comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's tying back into that phrase, be a creative force in the universe. The microdose just opens that up. And I still have my old tools in the toolbox, but new ideas come, new pathways emerge, new things that I can't necessarily see when I'm so stuck in my own box that I've created around my jiu-jitsu game, are opened up, and I'm now free to move about the cabin in whichever way I want. But you also mentioned something in the beginning I want to touch on, which is, when I got into jiu-jitsu, I had already had an extensive martial arts background in Taekwondo, Krav Maga, high school, middle school wrestling. So I had all these habits for these specific sports. And then once I got into jiu-jitsu, I noticed that some of those habits that were useful in those contexts were not useful in this context. So I had to unlearn or untrain a lot of things. So for instance, like in high school and middle school wrestling, the last thing you want is to be on your back. That's when you get pinned. That's when you lose a match. But here in jiu-jitsu, being on your back is a good place to be. There's a lot of options from there. And so I had to unlearn this fear of being on my back and learn to be more comfortable with it. And that's all about retraining my neural pathways, retraining my emotional response to being on my back, retraining, where my thoughts go. Instead of thinking I have to get out of here, it's more like, okay, I'm comfortable down here. Come on down into my world and let me show you what I can do off my back. So there's that retraining there that I get through athletics as well. And like I said, I get that through meditation, athletics, through my work, through psychedelic journeying, through my communication and relationship with my wife, constantly relearning how to be better in a relationship also. Because I have these hardwired behavior patterns and relational patterns that have been ingrained since my childhood because of my relationship with my mother. And I'm constantly having to identify and reshape those because they don't serve me. They don't serve my wife. They don't serve my relationship. And so it's constantly a process of refining and changing and shifting. And that's what I love about it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool, man. So you're starting, so you had a really busy year, but now you're starting to compete again next month, you said, or later this month?
I have a tournament. It's a round robin tournament next weekend. It'll be my first tournament as a brown belt. So I'm a bit more nervous than usual, but that's okay. I've been through this a number of times. And I'm going into this competition just, I know I'm not going to just clean up and clean house. I'm in a whole new bracket, a whole new set of guys that are going to want to whip my ass and choke me out. So I'm just going there to learn, to get the experience early on in my brown belt career and just really sort of feel out that level of the field and see what it has for me and where I need to improve. Because I also have, I'm hoping to get on another professional jiu-jitsu show in November. So people can check that out online. They do pay-per-views and stuff for that as well.
That's really cool. So what does that mean, a professional jiu-jitsu show?
So there's a couple professional jiu-jitsu promotions around the country and around the world. And in order to get on a pro show and be selected to join the ranks of professional jiu-jitsu fighter, you have to be selected, usually by the promoter, which in this case, the promoter is a black belt professor himself, so he knows what he's doing and who he's looking to put on his fight cards. But there's some really, really big professional jiu-jitsu fights known worldwide. Probably the biggest one is the Abu Dhabi Championships over in. Yeah. So, you have to be selected out of the top pros in the world by the sheik himself and by, the princes over there to go over there and demonstrate the art. So having reached this professional level, like I said, it was never really my intention when I got into jiu-jitsu to be professional, but it just happened along my journey. And I had my first pro match last November, and it was a magnificent experience. So if you can imagine, if you've ever seen the UFC, two guys out on a mat competing in front of all those watchful eyes, one fight at a time. That's exactly how the jiu-jitsu format is for professionals. There's one elevated mat in the middle of an arena. Two guys go out there, or two women, and they battle it out. And, there's maybe 15, 20 fights in a night. But it's all eyes on one match, and it's usually televised and pay-per-view, like I said. So we get more exposure, and we really get a chance to showcase to other people what our art is all about.
I used to do cross-country races and track, and I remember how intense the anxiety was pre-race. And that wasn't everybody watching me. That was everybody watching everybody. This is like horrifying. So I can only imagine with fighting, like the intensity of like all eyes on you. And that's got to be a really special feeling, especially if you're confident and you're feeling good about it.
Yeah, the feeling you get from that, I've channeled it both ways. It's been
Mm-hmm.
channeled in a way that has caused me to choke under pressure and falter. But I've also, learned to channel it in ways that energize me and that focus me and, sort of feeding off that energy of the crowd. It's an amazing experience under the lights. Um, and I try and go in it with no pressure. I try not to put any pressure on myself. This is just my life, and I'm having fun doing it, and it's been a blast.
Mm. Yeah, that's awesome, man. I uh, as soon as my body is ready to fight, I'm probably ready to start up some jujitsu training or some sort of strike training. I don't know exactly where I'll go yet, but I feel like there's something magical about martial arts. Maybe especially as a guy, but maybe not. I don't know. But I feel like it's something I should engage in. I've been really tied up with surgical recovery for maybe the last 2 years, I think. So someday soon my arms will work again and I'm ready to go. I'll let you know.
Yeah.
How does the belt system work? Not very psychedelic, and we can do it quickly. But brown belt,
Yeah.
is that like you put in like 4 years or 8 years or something?
So typically it takes people on average about 10 years to get a black belt in jiu-jitsu. It's one of the, out of all the martial arts across the world, it certainly takes the most time and dedication to reach the black belt level.
Mm-hmm.
Some other ones come really close too. I'm thinking of like Russian Sambo and things like that. But for jiu-jitsu, there's a basic 5 belt system. So there's white belt, blue belt, purple belt, brown belt, and then black belt. Each belt color has 5 levels within it. So you have just a standard white belt, and then you have 4 white stripes that you earn on your white belt before going to blue belt. And then you have 4 blue stripes or 4 white stripes to get on your blue belt before going to purple. So there's 5 basic colors, but there's 20. No, what? That's 5, 10. Yeah, maybe 25 different levels in there to attain before getting the black belt. And then if that wasn't hard enough, on top of all that, once you get your black belt, the journey starts over again. So you realize that you really don't know anything. You can get up, multiple degrees of black belt before you even get considered for what's called a coral belt. And above that is a red belt, someone who's been practicing for decades and decades and decades. So, you get the black belt and your journey has just begun all over again. And I love that about it. It's always evolving. It's always a new thing. But on average, about 8 to 10 years to get a black belt. I'm a bit of a slow learner, I like to say. So I've been practicing jiu-jitsu for about 10 years. Through injuries and surgeries and things like that. So it's taken me a little bit longer than most, but I'm happy with where I'm at and how long it took me to get where I am. It makes me feel confident in my abilities at the level that I'm at because I have a few more years experience than some others who are at the same belt level. But yeah, it's a journey and it takes dedication and consistency. It takes years and years. They say that earning a black belt is equivalent in study as earning a PhD from start to finish.
Right. And I would argue you would actually know a lot more after completing a black belt in jiu-jitsu, broadly speaking, than with a PhD.
Yeah, but possibly. And that's not to say, that you can't benefit even if you only make it to white belt.
Right.
My wife, she's a 2-stripe white belt. So that's like she's been doing it for a year consistently. And it's common for white belts to compare themselves and say, "Oh, I'm not as good as this blue belt, or I'm not as good as this purple belt." Well, that's fine. Your job as a white belt is to just soak up as much as possible. And I guarantee you, with 2 stripes on your white belt and a year of experience under your belt, I would, I would be confident with allowing you to, walk down a dark alley at night, if you so choose, and be able to defend yourself much better than anybody on the street. So, even a white belt on their first day after that first class is 10 times better at defending themselves than somebody who's never done it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about it that way, maybe not thinking, oh, I have to do 10 years to get a black belt. No, like every class makes you that much more effective at defending yourself and defending your family if you needed to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's why are we talking about it on a psychedelic show? It's because there's a lot of value in learning how to use your body. And there's a lot that also comes from being less afraid when you're walking down the street, maybe at night or otherwise. Being knowing that you can handle yourself, I think, really takes a lot of stress off of a lot of situations. That's me extrapolating as a non-martial artist, but I don't know. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, absolutely. I see a lot of parallels between psychedelic work and martial arts work. Um, and you'll notice this too once you get into jujitsu, but you'll find that it's way more psychological than it is physical, and it is extremely physical, but it's 10 times more psychological than physical. And the tools that you develop, the mental tools you develop through the training and through the practice and through getting through challenge and getting your ego smashed 50 times in an hour and all these things become extremely beneficial when doing psychedelic work. So when you do come against that experience in psychedelic work where you have that ego dissolution or the ego death experience, you can face it now with confidence, knowing that you're not going to die from it. And I don't know, the transferable skills between the two, I find to be extremely potent. So I know for your listeners, we are talking a lot about jujitsu, but this is all about consciousness and how we engage with our mind, whether it's in altered states through athletics or altered states through medicine work or altered states through breath work. It's all consciousness work.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Understanding how to use your will, critical thinking faculties, I guess wit, outwitting folks, like all that stuff really, really does have a lot to do with my language around psychedelic stuff is getting finicky lately because there's so many different use cases where I don't like I feel negligent sometimes lumping everything in together. Like this would be kind of like self-development, an analogy there. But there's so many other words you could throw in. It's almost like self-development meets recreation because I'm sure it's fun once in a while or most of the time.
Most of the time, yeah.
Yeah.
I would do it if it wasn't fun.
Yeah. Right. All right, cool. So we are at about an hour. Was there anything we might have missed, like your therapy practice or any other business stuff?
Yeah, I just want to point your listeners to my podcast again, Conversations with the Mind. You can reach out to me directly if you just want to talk or you have a comment or if you want some psychological services. My business page is www.mindops.com. That's mind-ops.com. I also recently started a YouTube channel that's also linked to my webpage, where I've been putting up YouTube content, videos on various topics, just going over some research, going over how people can integrate and apply these concepts into their life. Things like we've covered CBT, we've covered, I think, positive thinking, positive affirmations, a number of other topics related to enhancing your conscious experience of being a human day to day in every aspect of your life. So yeah, if anybody's interested in reaching out, let's continue to grow this community, and let's connect.
Absolutely. Create connections and positivity, and we can do it. So Shane LeMaster, thanks again for joining us, and I'm really excited to do it again in the future.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it.
And there you have it, Shane LeMaster. Again, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I loved it. He's a really fun guy to chat with about this stuff, and I think he's going to be doing some really interesting stuff in the future. So if you want to support the show, leave us a review on iTunes or Facebook. It really does make a difference. So please check that out and give us some feedback there. If you want to help us financially, we accept patrons over at patreon.com/psychedelics today. And if you want to get educated and support us, next month, October, we have a live supported Navigating Psychedelics course. The dates for that are October 4, 11, 18, and 25. So you do the classes on our online education platform and then meet up once a week for the month of October and dig in, ask questions, and unpack stuff. And I think it's going to be a really great, valuable learning experience. Kyle did this in the past, and it was great. People hung out and did some really great trades with each other, and it's just a great way to engage in this process and dig a little deeper. So hope you want to check that out. If you have any questions for us, you can hit us up, psychedelicstoday, email@gmail.com. And you can find out about the class and all our other offerings at psychedelicstoday.com. Thank you all for listening, and see you on the next episode. Bye.